Hello, I'm Rob Gifford with Move Newton Forward, and I'd like to take about 10 minutes to answer some key questions about the override and persuade you to join us in voting yes on May 20th. Proposition 2.5 caps the increase in taxes on existing property at 2.5% per year, unless there is an affirmative override or debt exclusion vote. On May 20th, Newton will vote on whether to increase property taxes by an additional $12 million. This would not be a one-time fix, but a long-term increase in the city's revenue base to meet long-term recurring expenses. For the median-priced home of just under $700,000, the annual cost of the override would be $373, which translates to $93 per quarter. Property taxes are deductible from federal income taxes, so assuming a 28% rate, the after-tax cost of the override would be $67 per quarter. We need an override because there is a structural deficit. Property taxes are capped by Prop 2.5, and state aid is not keeping pace with inflation. On the expense side, there are budget busters growing at a much faster rate. Newton is not alone in facing this problem. This structural deficit is a statewide issue. From 2006 through 2008, over 200 cities and towns will have held override or debt exclusion votes. In Newton's case, 80% of our city revenues come from property taxes. State aid is an important source of revenue as well. However, as you can see, it has been very unreliable and in constant dollars is below 1980s levels. On the expense side, there are four principal budget busters: health insurance, pensions, energy, and school enrollment costs. For the most part, these are mandatory costs, and we have no choice but to pay them. Over the past decade, health insurance costs have grown from 8% to 13.5% of the city's total budget. Likewise, pension costs have grown by over 50% since fiscal year 2003. At the same time, we've added over 400 elementary school students. This increase is equivalent to building a new school. During the same period, there has been nearly a 100% increase in high-level special needs students. Over the past 2 years alone, the number of English language learners has grown by 26%. Newton is required to provide these higher needs students with a quality education in compliance with unfunded state mandates. You can see the cumulative impact of these budget busters on the Newton schools. Between 2000 and 2006, energy costs grew at over 16% a year, health insurance at 11%, and special education at over 7%. Now let's take a step back and see how Newton compares with other communities. We benchmarked Newton against 14 neighboring communities, including Brookline, Cambridge, Natick, Winchester, and Wellesley. Please note that these figures are fiscal year 2008 or sometimes 2007, depending on what data was available from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue and the Department of Education. Newton's total city and school spending is just over $4,100 per person. As you can see here, this figure is just below the midpoint of our comparable cities and towns. And our school spending per pupil is just above the midpoint. Newton's average single-family tax bill is just under $7,800, which is right at the midpoint. And the 46% growth in Newton's taxes since fiscal year 2000 is well below the midpoint and compares favorably with many of our neighbors, whose tax bills have grown at 60 to 80% over the same period. In 2002, Newton passed its first override for $11.5 million. Many of our peer group communities have passed multiple overrides since the 1980s. While the absolute size of Newton's override is large, Newton is a large city. And when we compare cumulative overrides to the total size of the tax base, you will note that Newton, at just over 5%, is well below the midpoint, and a number of communities, such as Winchester and Arlington, are over 10%, with others, such as Wayland, approaching 25%. Commercial property is great for the city's budget. Office buildings and shopping centers are assessed at a high value. and they are often taxed at nearly twice the rate of residential property, and they consume less in the way of city services since they don't send kids to school. Newton is an overwhelmingly residential city. Compared with the 25 Massachusetts cities and towns with populations above 50,000 people, Newton has the second lowest commercial and industrial tax base at just over 15%. Compared with cities like Waltham and Cambridge, which have a commercial tax base of over 50%, Newton is fighting the structural deficit with one arm tied behind its back. Now let's take a look at the budget situation here in Newton. For fiscal year 2009, projected general fund revenues are $275 million, and expenses are $287 million. The proposed override will cover the $12 million operating gap. So what happens if the override doesn't pass? The schools will need to cut $8.5 million, and the city will have to cut $3.5 million in order to balance the budget. In order to cut $8.5 million, the schools will eliminate nearly 80 existing positions, including teachers, specialists, and aides. In addition, the schools will cancel the planned addition of 50 positions slated for rising enrollments, math coaching, and other initiatives. Class sizes will increase, extracurricular activities will be curtailed. Technology and maintenance budgets will be cut. Efforts to replace or renovate Ainger and Cabot elementary schools will be stalled. 4 elementary school modulars will be canceled since we won't have the teachers to fill these needed additional classrooms. On the city side, nearly 40 positions will be eliminated, including 15 police officers. There will be cuts in the maintenance of buildings, streets, and parks. All 4 library branches will be closed, and senior services will be reduced. Besides raising taxes, how is the city dealing with the structural deficit? Over the past 7 years, the City General Fund has eliminated nearly 50 positions. In addition, the city and schools have pursued a number of other efficiency initiatives, such as transferring management of the pension assets to the better performing state fund, negotiating a contract to make our buildings more energy efficient, purchasing and converting streetlights, buying drugs in Canada for our health insurance program, and aggressively pursuing state, federal, and private grants. There are a number of other potential initiatives as well in the future. These include regionalization and consolidation of services, taxation of telecom property, joining the state health insurance plan, increasing commercial development, and better utilization of surplus property. There's also pending legislation on Beacon Hill, such as local option taxes, that would offer cities and towns additional sources of revenue. However, none of these initiatives are going to close the deficit in the short term. What about Newton North? With or without a new high school, we would need this override to fund operating deficits. Voting no on the override will have no impact on Newton North, which will be built in any event. Newton North construction costs will be funded by the sale of city bonds, state grants, and low-interest loans. Debt service on the city bonds will be funded by the Capital Reserve Fund and the operating budget over a 30-year period. The structural deficit caused by Prop 2.5 and budget buster expenses has created a gap in our city's finances. Communities across Massachusetts are facing the same challenge. Many have passed multiple overrides and raised taxes significantly. We need this $12 million override in order to maintain Newton's quality of life, including our great schools, reliable public safety, and efficient city services. Strong property values are based on a foundation of high-quality schools and city services, so passage of this override will support and enhance the value of your home. Thank you for your time and attention. For more information or to learn how to get involved, please go back to the home page and explore the various links and resources offered on this website. Vote yes on May 20th, and thank you for your time.